Hey
Okay.
guys. Hey guys, this is the of Harry. Today I'm joined by special guest Sisi Nxumalo, and we've known each other a bit on Facebook. You're incredible. That's why I want to talk to you about all you do with shadow work. Your introduction would be that you're a dynamic is passionate about soul alignment and public speaking. You create and run your own soul alignment courses around the world globally. Public speaker. You've spoken in many countries around the world. You studied law and you'd like to connect people on a soul level. You are a Sanagmo, which is an interesting word, meaning you're an ancestrally gifted psychic intuitive healer who loves to help people thrive by helping them connect with the most authentic soul version of themselves. So there's a little intro, CC. Nice to meet and hi.
Hi, Harry. Thanks for the intro. Nice to meet you too.
Thanks. Yeah, wow. I guess to unpack it, yeah. So you call it what you teach, shadow work, the alphabet. And I like that
Yeah,
because shadow work, as me you talked a little bit about, and you can definitely unpack for us, is really important and also not liked as much or not as fluffy and hey, let's go and do this. So I really like the angle that
yeah.
you present, the multitude of things you can talk about with shadow work. So I guess first question is how did you get to wanting to teach this stuff to people?
And Shadowwork, yeah. So as a Sangoma, as you said in the intro, which is an intuitively psychic healer, it's something that's passed on generationally in my culture and in my lineage. So I found that with people who I was interacting with, they were very misaligned with themselves, like very disconnected from themselves. So they were wanting things that aren't for them. They were wanting help with things that you shouldn't. It's like a dog wanting you to help them fly, whereas like this dog is very out of tune with itself. And then feeling like crap because you can't fly like an eagle, whereas you can bark like a dog, and that's how you are meant to be. So a big part of why people were so disconnected was they don't look at their shadow. Yes, there's the trauma, there's the wounding, and that's a big contributing factor. But there's also like a strong sense of cultural um, ideology of only presenting a best version of yourself and not looking at a whole version of yourself, which is a true version of yourself. So, for example, I'm a lawyer, or I was a lawyer, and in that profession, there's a lot of your shadow that you operate in as a part of your job. Like you are arrogant, you are obnoxious, you are all sorts of unpalatable things, but that's a part of your job is to be that way. And if you then shut those parts of yourself down or condemn them to be bad, there's a whole lot of yourself that you're not really going to tap into, or which is more normal, you tap into in a lower vibration like shame or fear, or you feel guilty for being who you are. So, why I created that Shadowwork series was to help people work through their own shadow, really, but to really start thinking about the shadow as something normal. Because some shadow work stuff that I've seen on the internet, the shadow is kind of like this thing you visit on a full moon and then you kind of leave it alone for the rest of the time, like something that you're trying to get rid of, something that is like a plague, a cancer. Whereas the shadow, it's you. So if you are an obnoxious, arrogant bitch, that's a part of you. It's not going to go away just because someone doesn't like it. So shadow work helps you integrate that so you know when not to be that and when to be that. And then to be a whole person and not like the fake love and light because you're spiritual and rainbows and butterflies come out your ass and things like that.
Mm.
So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, it's interesting how some people can think that by doing yoga or becoming a perception of spiritual through other people's eyes, you suddenly are going to become one with God. It's a bit crazy to think like that, but I guess. Yes. So yeah, shadow work is
Yeah.
really important. Yeah. Like I'm big into that now too.
Yeah.
I'm really understanding. Um, I've always known that it's dangerous the ego to move from apathy, which I came from. A lot of people come from apathy and addiction to negative things to we move it to the other way, yeah. So the positive addiction,
Mm,
I've always
mm,
known about it and known it's inside me, and I'm trying to loosen it up. And the only way to loosen it up, I feel, to loosen this egoic move from negative to positive, which I think is just as toxic, is to understand shadow work. understand what your brain's
Yeah.
doing, understand how you see the world with your values, your beliefs. And that's why I like
Mm.
shadow work because it runs through things. It's not like when I hear from my angle, it's not like I hear it and I think, wow, I've never heard this before. And there's all levels, maybe some. But it's not like, oh yeah, I can relate to that and resonate as I walk my journey. What you said makes sense. And yeah, it's important to have structure for people to figure out all these things.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found that like with my courses, structure helps. So at some point I just did like blanket coaching. And I found that with that, there's a lot of the shadow that can hide because people are always trying to kind of help you be the best version of themselves or me help them. But you can't do that if you're not looking at the worst versions of yourself and accepting that, not trying to pretend to heal or pretend to move past it, like accepting those things. And sometimes you do need healing, so that's where my work as a Sangoma comes in, like the healing part and going into the real aspects of things. Because some things are very spiritual. Like some people have been completely hijacked by entities in their shadow,
Yeah.
actually. So when you get to look at those things through things like going through the trauma work and stuff, then you're able to integrate. But just because the reason you're a bitch is because you were traumatized, it's not going to now suddenly change the fact that you're a bitch when you heal. You're just going to have a more integrated version of that version of yourself into
Right.
other more positive things. As I like how you put it, the positive addiction.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's a trap. I'm big on pride, so I see a lot in our communities. Um, it's like how to explain it. If you became famous from nothing and you have great knowledge and you obsessed over one thing, so you look, you were addicted to negative things like drugs, and then you found juice fasting, for example, and that's all you did. And I'm
Yeah.
not criticizing or judging, but if that's all you ever
Yeah.
focused your entire life on, and you're receiving validation because now you've set up retreats, and that is your entire focus. Your entire focus is juice mastery, and you
Yeah.
need to in your head. So then you can get lost in, well, people are always coming to me. I need the retreats. And then you obsess over juice fasting. And then what happens is, with a lot of them that do this, is now there's a separation consciousness coming in because now I'm better than other
Mm.
people. And then
Yeah.
the entire reason we do shadow work and spirituality and the entire reason we exist here is to become a little more compassionate towards people we don't know. We find it easy maybe with our friends and family and loved ones, and even then not in the case, but we find it harder with
Yeah.
strangers, unconditional love. And I think that these
Yeah.
blocks, or not looking at the shadow or pride, they stop you. So I'm very interested in
Yeah.
all that stuff. I don't want it for me. I'm not saying I won't go in there. I just, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want these things. It doesn't feel nice to be separate, to feel so aloof in my,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And also, like, when it comes to things like self-love, for example, using your juice fasting example, like, now I love myself because I used to be a drug addict, now I'm a juice fanatic, and etc., etc. You can't love yourself if you hate your shadow because your shadow is
Mm.
yourself. Then you get into the whole disassociative thing, like the ego dying, ego bashing nonsense, um, which is just rubbish, really, because that's still you. Oh, what a cute cat.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So
yeah,
were you
because
saying that
that
last bit was
ego
nonsense?
is
What were you saying was nonsense? Sorry, the ego dying? Ego,
the ego bashing,
ego
because
back.
at the end of the day, that's still you. So you can bash yourself for being, for example, a bitch all you want. You're still a bitch at the end of the day. And then what happens is like the scandal stuff. Like now this juice fasting person is pigging out at McDonald's and people are so lost because their
Yeah.
juicing savior had a human moment. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Right? Yeah, exactly. That puts it back on the person as, yeah, you're not even allowed to be human and have all these things. So, okay, first question. If someone's completely new to shadow work, where do they start? And so you talked about the shadow, maybe talk about what it is. Why do we need
Mm,
to explore it? And once you do explore it, how do you integrate it or fix it? What are we doing with this?
mm. Yeah. So just to answer, I'm not going to answer your questions in sequence, but I'll answer all of them. So what the shadow is, it's the unseen, hidden parts of yourself. So it's not necessarily the parts of you that people dislike. or necessarily the parts of you that people like. It's the parts of you that you are not conscious of. So a shadow quality, for example, can be that you're very kind, Harry, but you are not conscious of your kindness. And so your kindness operates in shadow. You are kind because you think you need to be kind for people to like you. And so your kindness then becomes something that's more of a liability in your life than an asset. It's a manipulative tactic, really. You're not being a kind person, you're being manipulative.
Mm.
Shadow work is bringing those parts of yourself to your conscious mind and not leaving them hidden in the frequencies of shame, guilt, and fear. So it's not becoming a perfect person. It's becoming a conscious person, becoming more conscious of yourself. So, for example, let's take the lawyer who's an obnoxious bitch. Now, she lives in the state, obviously. It's her job. But, or rather, her job requires her to be that.
I
You
just
can
interrupt and
be
ask
a
you if
conscious.
can I just ask and interrupt if that was you? Because you said you were a lawyer. I mean, maybe you can
Oh,
relate to me.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. This is from experience.
Okay. I thought so. I thought so. It's cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So say
yeah.
there's say, sorry.
Oh, no, no. So you were saying that you were brought into so you're a conscious, that makes sense to me. You're a lawyer and you have to go with a side you know that's wrong sometimes, right? You're fighting for the wrong side and you can know that. And and you
Well,
still,
that's the thing. What wrong is very subjective, for example. Well, especially in law. In law, there is no wrong side. You are arguing for your client. Your client, the law determines what's wrong, not you. So
Mhm.
you don't have the room to necessarily judge that. You can have a moral conflict with something, but then that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. That becomes a gray question in the area of law. But when it comes to like being a normal person, you can have qualities that you have, for example, as a lawyer, where you are obnoxious and you're arrogant and you're a bitch. And you can be consciously that. And so now you're using those parts of yourself to like put forward your argument or to win your case or to fight for your client. Or you can be unconsciously that, and now not only are you that at home, you're coming, or at work, you're coming home and you're an
Mm,
obnoxious, arrogant bitch to your children, to your
mm,
spouse, to people in traffic, and you're not conscious of that. When you become conscious of that, you can stop yourself where you don't need to be. So
yeah.
now in court, of course, you're an obnoxious, arrogant bitch. That's how you're going to win your case. But when you come home to your spouse, being an obnoxious, arrogant bitch actually needs to calm down. You
Mm,
may want to be more of a compassionate, loving, understanding person and not necessarily betray the shadow part, but just be conscious of the fact that I don't need to be this right now. I can be consciously loving to the spouse. I can be consciously loving to my children. Or if you're stressed, you can acknowledge that I'm stressed, but I don't need to be an obnoxious bitch right now. With a lot of people, they struggle to acknowledge that I'm an obnoxious bitch. Oh my God, because they have this concept of this is wrong, this is bad, I'm not supposed to be this. Then it slips into the whole I'm going to try not to be, which is false. You're not, you know. You can become consciously that and know when to show up as that and when not to.
mm,
And that becomes the shadow work, the inner work that you then need to do, where sometimes you're showing up that way because you wounded or you triggered, as I saw in one of your videos the other day. Someone triggers you and you're an obnoxious bitch.
mm,
Becoming conscious is realizing that I don't need to react like this right now. I can choose to be calm and controlled.
yeah.
So, where someone would begin with shadow work, just to answer that question, so I do personal coaching with people who are wanting to explore that part of themselves. So I run my courses in quite a structured way where we look at what aspects of yourself in your life you're wanting to become more conscious of, because the whole point of shadow work is to become a more conscious being. So if you are wanting to show up, for example, in more love and light in your life because you're tired of being depressed or you're tired of feeling like shit, you're going to need to look at yourself consciously, because at the end of the day, you are the one who's feeling depressed and like shit. So the answer to feeling happier and more joyful is also going to be in you. It's
Mm,
not going to be in like some false habits that you're suddenly going to take on. Like, for example, that juicing, and now all you do is juice and you're happy and the sun shines up your ass. No, there's still going to be aspects of yourself that you are not conscious of. And shadow work is becoming more conscious of that. So, as I
Mm,
said, how I run my courses is a structured way for the specific individual client who's wanting to look at their shadow for a specific purpose. So, I don't do the whole I want to be a better person, because there's no such thing. It's more like I want to become a conscious version of myself for this purpose, because shadow work is hard. It's not easy. It's unpleasant. No one wants to look there. And there needs to be a higher motive for you wanting to go into those parts of yourself. For example, other my clients who are like in a professional space, they want to become better professionals. And to do that, you need to look at the unconscious parts of yourself. So where you are wanting to step up to leadership, how are you not being that in your day-to-day life? So are you insecure? Let's look at the insecurities. Are you terrible with people? Let's look at your people skills. To look at the shadow aspects of yourself, the things you really don't want to look at. And then the course is more accountability and helping you become conscious of yourself, not become more ashamed of yourself. So if you go to work and you shout at people and you don't like how that feels, there's a unconscious part of you where that's coming from, which is your shadow. And that is essentially what shadow work is about. You're not going to be fixed. That's the point of this. You're going to become whole and integrated. And when you are whole, you can become a more integrated being in true love and light, which also includes your shadow.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. Yes. So what I'm getting from what you're saying, I've been unconsciously doing shadow work. There's levels I can improve, don't get me wrong, but unconsciously, I've been consciously doing it without a structure. So like you're giving a structure, which is good. And it makes me think that, yeah, you're correct. The side that you need in a certain role in society might be tough, or to protect yourself, or to let people know what's up in a good way to lead. And
Mm.
then when you come home, well, a lot of people I know, they get lost in their roles of their jobs. So I can probably
Yeah.
understand and resonate with people that get lost in. I mean, I see characters out and about. Their role when they're working is the same role outside of work, and that's not
Mm.
necessarily the best way to, as a balanced whole human being. That's not the best way. We have to be different things. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's just the way the world is. We are different. We are multifaceted beings. We have to be different with all the people we are. But that's with our lovers, partners,
Yeah.
friends, close friends, distant friends, people at work. And
Mm.
yeah, what you
Mm.
said makes sense. You've got to yeah, I just find the whole topic basically fascinating. This idea
Mm.
that we have to adapt, and if we don't, it's going to come with these negative emotions. Can you talk about them a little bit? So, because I've dealt with shame. I think a lot of us carry a lot of
Mm.
shame. I know I did when I first arrived on
Mm.
this island. I carried a load of shame for just existing here. Trying to grow. So how do these emotions come into us, and how can we lessen these negative emotions?
Mm. Yeah, well, most of them, like the common ones, shame, guilt, and fear, we taught, right? And most of us come from that. I would love to see the person who doesn't, and call Ripley's, but most of us come from backgrounds where we were raised in shame, fear, and guilt, and a lot of those things are actually quite ancestral patterns of shame, guilt, and fear, and having that ingrained in you from childhood. So then what happens is that you experience yourself in that energy. So you are afraid of certain aspects of yourself, you feel guilty about certain aspects of yourself, and you're deeply ashamed of yourself in whatever capacity. And that then leads you to have a certain outlook of yourself and of life and your own trajectory in life. So if you carry a deep sense of shame, which a lot of people do, you'll feel so ashamed of even dreaming your dreams, let alone fulfilling them. Or you'll be ashamed in your relationships, or you'll be ashamed in your friendships. But shame will rule so much of who you are that it can sit in your shadow if you're not conscious of it. So with things like shame, that's more of like an inner work thing that someone would be willing to go through, because a lot of those things require healing. So you would need to go back to the things in your family, which most people come from perfect families in their estimations, right? So they don't want to look at
Right,
that.
right, yeah.
And your
Mm.
your culture and society to actually see what caused you to be ashamed of yourself and what are you ashamed of. Once again, let's just take the obnoxious, arrogant bitch example. You can be so ashamed of that aspect of yourself operates in shame. Whereas when you love the arrogant, obnoxious bitch, you can be so passionately that in the right context and that serves you, and then not be that because you don't have to be that all the time. For example, some people, especially men, are ashamed of like their compassion, their kindness, their more feminine attributes because they were taught not to feel those things or that it's not masculine. So when you experience those parts of yourself in love, which can only come through healing and doing the inner work as it pertains to that, that's integrated into the personal shadow work courses that I do with people because you do need to look at those types of things. But you're never going to heal your whole life. You have a whole lineage of wounds and traumas and wars and all sorts of things. But what you heal is where you're wanting to go towards in your life, or if you're feeling particularly um not stuck in a certain energy, but where you feel like that, like a stronghold of shame, for example, usually requires more spiritual aspects of healing because
Mm.
sometimes entities live there, sometimes entities that have held a whole bloodline captive live there. And that becomes a different kind of work than just coaching because there's certain things that you need to be willing to do. And that's harder, I find, because it means that you need to function in a way that men in your bloodline haven't functioned in before, which is not easy. So maybe your dad used to beat the shit out of you because he was ashamed, and his dad did that because he was ashamed, and his dad did that because he was ashamed. And now you're the first man to not have that shame. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yes, so you're talking about ancestral. Yeah, I definitely. So shame's a big one. I know loads of us carry it, guilt and fear. They're all tied together. Um,
Mm,
and yes, I was thinking as well when you were talking that one way I've done it, um, is actually I've got a lot of work to do myself, but I have when I meet guys, I'll see, not judging. I'm like working out whether I want to be friends with them, and I can see the archetypes in the person very quickly of how high the vibration of a person is to be my friends or just people out and about.
mm,
So I gravitate towards friends that are that have archetypes that I can tell they've integrated their shadow basically. So I can tell, I know
mm,
what the archetypes of a Kurd, even if say I wasn't a Kurd, I can see I can see I observe the behaviors and the way people speak that are high frequency and have done their shadow work and integration. And then I know I
mm.
want to hang out with them more and I do hang out with them. And of course it rubs off on you. So I'm saying people is a good way to, if you I think there's needs to understand shadow work, but also you need to, I feel like it helpful to hang around the right people that have things that you don't have or that you want, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And the right people also change as you change, especially when you are doing inner work. So the right people may be like your drug friends if you're still a drug addict, for example, because you like them. And but then as you do your shadow work, you'll find that even people you thought were the right people, like your juicing buddy who runs retreats,
Mm.
actually has certain parts of himself that don't resonate with you once you start to look at your shame, for example. You
Yeah.
may have thought he's so cool, and it's the shame that drew you to him because you felt so ashamed of yourself. Then, as you work on your shame, you realize that this guy is actually not what I thought he was, and there are people who are more integrated, who are less ashamed of themselves, that you may have been even offended by before because you thought, oh, how shameless. And then
Mm.
as you release your shame, those people become more your vibe and more your tribe.
Yeah, that's so true. As you go along this journey, my friends and yeah, change. What I look up to before in people isn't as much as what I look up to now. And another thing is that
Yeah,
people you can never know with people based on a social media perception, because that's another danger. It's
yeah,
more like you need to meet someone, you'll get a feel for them,
yeah.
whether they're just calm, peaceful, pleasant, socially. socially acuitive, saying the right things in the right moment, aware of the room, all these kind of things. It's very interesting. Yeah, what would you say is the biggest
Yeah.
shadow? What would you say is the biggest shadow? If you were to do a letter for us or a word, or the biggest, because it's silly to say this in a way, but what's the thing you see the most that holds people back, shadow-wise? What's the hardest to transmute, the hardest to look at?
Fear, for sure.
Hmm.
To look at your fears is very confronting because a lot of us identify ourselves with our fears and not our hopes. So to look at fear is to be willing to change because fear obviously is an illusion, but when you're believing the thing that you fear, it's very real. So the fear of being humiliated, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being alone is a big one for a lot of people, the fear of not being loved, the fear of not being good enough. All these things are fears. And when you really look at fear, what you actually need is hope. Hope that things can be different to how they currently are. So, for example, if you have fear of being alone and ending up alone, um, assuming it doesn't come from some sort of trauma where you were left in a box somewhere when you were a child or something like that, to integrate that fear is to understand that you will never overcome fear completely in your life because you're a human being, but that this fear of being alone that's holding you back in your life can be integrated when you start to incorporate more hope of not being alone. So instead of focusing your energy into the fear, you start to focus your energy into the hope, but you become aware of the fear. It's not ignoring it or dissociating it or repressing it. It's actually facing it and allowing yourself to find out, where does this come from? Then once you are there, it's focusing your energy into hope, the hope of actually being with someone, the hope of whatever it is that you want, the hope of better friendships, the hope of connections. Then your energy starts to focus authentically into the hope, but you always have that fear. That's the thing there. It's not a bad thing, it's not your enemy. And then you can gauge yourself properly with time as to how much of yourself is operating from that fear and how much of yourself is operating from that hope. And as you grow, more of yourself will begin to operate from the hope of having friends or the hope of having a spouse or whatever the being alone means to you, and less from the fear. But there'll always be a moment, say your friend decides to ditch you and not be your friend anymore. You're going to then be triggered by that fear of being alone. And the shadow work then gives you the tools to be able to go there and not like sink in that fear like you used to, and then learn how to pivot into the hope and saying that friendship ended, but I still have hope that I'll have other friends in the future. And
Yeah.
you put your inner work energy into the hope as opposed to having the fear grip you in the shadows where you can't see it, but it's actually running your life.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting. So as that example, I guess, if I was to lose a friend, that I thought that meant something to me, a friend, then my brain would tell me to go and go out there basically more. There'll be an imperative inside my head to go out there more to make new friends because I'm very aware, like you, that there's abundance in the world. I think abundance runs through
Mm,
my vessel. Even if I don't feel it, I know it.
yeah.
So I will, I
Mm,
know that there's, I mean, even relationships, right? So a relationship goes wrong,
yeah.
then, and you think it's the one, and don't get me wrong, you can go in love and all these things, but I'm very aware that, I mean, it's an awareness that there's just loads of people out there. There's loads of friends, there's loads of partners, there's loads of there's no reason to go with the fear. The fear is a scarcity, right? Fear is a scarcity mindset,
Yeah.
like a lack
Yeah.
of or what can go wrong, and also quite self-enveloping and narcissistic actually. This fear that
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of selfishness in fear, and there's a lot of selflessness in
Mm,
facing your fears. That could be one of the
mm, mm.
I read a book once called Face Your Fears. What's it called? Face Your Fears and Do It Anyway by Suzanne Jeffers. And
Yeah.
that taught me a lot. I lived by that code for many years. I still live by it now, but I was really obsessed with facing my fears.
Yeah.
When I had the most fears is when I really got obsessed with facing my fears. Like,
Mm. Yeah. And I think, as you say, like doing it anyway is great. And then the benefit, of shadow work would be doing it with an awareness of it. So because sometimes when you do it anyway, you have no measure of how far you've actually come. Whereas when you are consciously doing the shadow work, you can know that, oh my gosh, the last time I did something I was afraid of, I shat my pants. And this time I'm more conscious of the fear, but I'm moving more consciously toward that thing, because it's not going to not be there. I think that's the biggest thing with shadow, that people want these parts of themselves to go away, like amputating parts of yourself just because you don't like your arms. You don't need to amputate it. You can get fit, you can get ripped, you can get slim, you can get whatever it is you want to be, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean amputate these parts of yourself. Become aware of them, become
Mm,
conscious of them, and
mm.
not necessarily self-rejection, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. When you're talking about so you use the law example. One example I've got in my head is the martial arts or Muay Thai fighters. So I watch that a lot.
Mm,
And obviously these guys are professionals. They train, they dedicate their entire lives. Their bodies go through so much abuse in order to become the best, and a massive respect for it. But what I've noticed is they need to use, and they do use when they're fighting, they use a dark side, almost like a dark shadow, demonic side, whatever you want to call it. And I don't
yes,
judge it, but I
yes.
see it because sometimes their tongue will come out, they'll provoke the other one. When they finish the fight, they'll do all kinds of mannerisms to think, so you're using your shadow to help you win. So that's an example
Mm,
to me of like when you integrate your shadow, but you are really deeply, highly authentic, high vibration dude outside, but you come into the ring,
mm,
you need to use your shadow, your
mm,
demons, you're keeping it alive
mm,
to win. And
mm.
it's okay that they haven't rejected that
Yeah,
side themselves. If they rejected that side themselves, I don't think
yeah.
they'd be the professionals that they were. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And to experience that side of yourself in a higher vibration. So you don't want your demons in shame. You want your demons in your power. Maybe you want to tap into like a higher frequency like rage. Rage is a higher frequency than fear, for example, because you start to tap
mm,
into your power. And then when you in that, so a lot of people are taught to be wimps and
mm,
simps
mm,
and dissociative, and to think that to not have rage is good,
mm,
whereas it's knowing how to use your rage and when to have it. So, for example, if someone is like trying to beat up your child, you need to tap into that rage quickly and beat the shit out of them.
mm,
That's shadow, but that's a conscious shadow, because now you don't need to go home and be enraged with your child and beat the shit out of them.
mm.
So it's as you say, like with the martial arts example, they have integrated that part of themselves to become champions, but it's a dark shadow part of themselves. We hope they don't come home and be like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
we do have to use that example because, I mean, you do have to use those. It sounds silly, the example, but basically, in a not so silly, some people are doing that. Some people are using their shadow, but also they're not in because of not integrating it. You're saying they're using it
Mm.
inappropriately so it's not
Yeah.
appropriate. It's coming out too much, almost like a projection, like
Mm.
a trigger when you're just
Yeah.
acting, reacting,
Yes.
and you're not acting. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah.